Hey everyone, welcome back to Empowered and Out, the podcast where we focus on building careers that actually feel aligned, confident, and sustainable. I'm your host, Jonathan, but most people call me John, also known as Coach John, career coach and advocate for showing up fully at work. And this season, we're talking about visibility and authenticity, what it takes to unmask your identity and really lead without leaving parts of yourself behind. And this year, we're doing things differently. We're elevating, we're expanding, we're prospering together through real conversations and coaching-centered insights. My goal is to help you reconnect with your confidence, trust yourself more, and start making career choices that support not just your success, but your well-being as well. And if you're listening, thinking, okay, I'm ready for support with this, you can book a call with me. The link is in the show notes. So take a breath, settle in, and let's get into today's conversation. So today's guest is a true catalyst for inclusive leadership and bold career moves. Dr. Steve Yacovelli, also known as the Gay Leadership Dude, is an expert in leadership development, organizational change, belonging, and using AI to get smarter business results. After working inside powerhouse organizations like the Walt Disney Company, IBM, and Tupperware brands, Steve launched his own consulting firm, Top Dog Learning Group, where he's been helping organizations thrive since 2008. He's also an award-winning author of Pride Leadership, Strategies for the LGBTQ plus Leader to be the King or Queen of Their Jungle, and the Amazon bestseller, Your Queer Career, Workplace Advice from the Gay Leadership Dude. Steve's not-so-hidden agenda, making the world more inclusive and effective, one leader at a time. So Steve, welcome to Empowered and Out.
Thank you, Coach John. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Steve, before we jump in, something I'm doing this year, which I feel very needed in this time that we're living in, is an energy check-in. So on a scale from 1 to 10, how is your energy today? And what's contributing to that?
I love that you asked that. Thank you. As more of a solopreneur, sometimes we don't get those questions. So thank you for that. I think today it's probably about a 7.25. Had a good week. Had some good movement on some client potential projects, and really diving into our new inclusive AI product stuff that we're doing. And as we said before we hit the record button, working on my podcast as well. And so yeah, it's doing pretty good this week.
Awesome. Well, for myself, I would say I'm at a 10. Like I mentioned to you before we started recording, I got amazing sleep last night and I got some caffeine. So I'm really good right now. So let's talk about queer leadership and owning your style. So you've spent years working with leaders across industries, and you've built a whole brand about queer leadership. When you zoom out, what do LGBTQ plus professionals still get wrong about what it actually means to lead?
That's a great question. Yeah. So I as you said, I do a lot of work with both LGBTQ plus and ally leaders, a lot of employee resource groups, a lot of organizations where we are the certified leadership vendor. So I've been really fortunate to see both queer and ally leaders, and the ones who are rocking and rolling and the ones who are kind of crashing and burning. And I think when we think about our rainbow family leaders, if you will, the authenticity piece, I think, is what I'm seeing some folks trip up on. So let me explain that kind of clearly. Matter of fact, this was just the topic of yesterday on my career leadership class. It was the module on authenticity, so it's probably why it's high in my head. But you see some newer leaders who are kind of just starting their journey. This is who I am, like it or not. And I applaud that. I think that's fantastic. However, you and I know, who are a little bit further along on our journeys, that you have to be mindful of context. And in Pride Leadership, as well as in your career, I cite an example of you always get Steve, no matter what. But Steve in Europe might be slightly different because I understand the cultural context. Or Steve at the club or at the bar with his best friends, that's a different Steve than the one who's sitting in the boardroom having a conversation with a potential client partner. And so it's always going to be me, but the dials get adjusted just a little bit. And I think smart leaders understand that context. It's not being phony, because the moment you're phony, people know, but it's really being mindful of the context that you're in and adjusting to kind of meet that that kind of that person where they are at. It's not some people call it code switching. I don't advocate that, but it's just being mindful of your context and who your authentic self is in that time.
All right. Well, where do you see people shrinking when they don't have to, which is very well known in our community for sure.
I'm seeing it where folks are in organizations that are doing that performative allyship, and they're really not feeling safe to be their authentic selves. Especially now, it's become pretty obvious which of those organizations have pulled back from their diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. They're being very vocal in when things are being said against our community. And so I have coached several queer leaders who are just like, I feel vulnerable. I don't feel as safe as I did 4 years ago because my employer is not standing up to be that good ally that they used to be.
Nice. Okay. So just to continue on that, like what's something that queer leaders bring to the table that straight cis workplaces often really need, even if they don't realize it?
I thank you for asking another question too. When I was set out to write my last book, Pride Leadership Strategies for the LGBTQ plus leader to be the king or queen in the jungle, it actually started as a generic leadership book. I was sitting at the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber conference. It was my very first one. And I was sitting outside of a session sorting business cards. There was a woman next to me kind of doing the same thing. And she's like, what do you do? I said, well, consulting, leadership, blah, blah, blah. How about you? And she's like, I'm a publisher. I'm like, there's a leadership book in my head. She's like, well, let's get that book out. And so side note, Jen Grace, publisher, Purpose Press, queer owned, which is even more awesome. But as I started to write this quote unquote generic leadership book, I really reflected on the leadership competencies that I saw amongst leaders over my, at the time, almost 30 years of doing this stuff. And you start to see a pattern of behavior. And so that's where I started to kind of write it. And then, John, I'm sure you know Sex and the City, the TV show.
Of course, yeah.
So I assume some of our listeners and watchers will as well. Well, the original version, not the latest version. Remember Carrie would sit down at her little MacBook and she'd like, I couldn't help but wonder, and kind of do that thing. And that's kind of what got me thinking as I'm starting to put together the notes for this generic leadership book. I'm looking at our queer brothers and sisters and siblings who are doing advocacy work on behalf of our community. And my little Carrie Bradshaw went off and I said, I couldn't help but wonder, is there something about the queer experience that allows us to look at leadership just a little bit differently? And that's kind of where I took the 6 competencies that I have found any leader, regardless of your demographic, that really makes a difference. And if you're not watching, you're just listening, they are on the screen: authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationships, and culture. In my experience, these are the 6 that make a leader very successful. But then when I made the pivot in Pride Leadership and then made it less generic and more targeted to our audience, I put those 6 competencies through the rainbow lens, if you will, and said, okay, what does authenticity look like as an out gay man in the workplace or a trans person being their true selves in work? That's power. That's leadership power. Mm-hmm. And in Pride Leadership, and then subsequently in Your Queer Career, I talk about how we as queer leaders look at these 6 competencies through a different lens. We've had the ability to practice many of them differently, and that just can lead to channeling even more powerful leadership than maybe we're.
Nice. I like that. I like that a lot. That's very fascinating, very beneficial, honestly.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's talk about using AI without losing the human side. So you talk a lot about AI as a leadership tool, not some scary robot overlord.
No.
When leaders ask you, okay, but how do I actually use this? What do you tell them?
Yeah, thank you. I've been so obsessed with AI for the last couple of years, actually. And I've been using it in my own small business. I have a Google-based business. Gemini came out. And I'm like, oh, I'm already paying for it. Let's do something like this. Because I was playing around with ChatGPT, and I have some tools where it's embedded already. But I really started thinking about it through the lens of effective leadership. Everyone's using it for do my social media post or write this email. And I'm like, how can I make it be what I used to have people do? We all have that work wife, work husband, work spouse, or whether that, or even the real one, maybe, who knows? But I've always been fortunate enough, even in my business, I have other small business owners that we kind of work together to kind of hold each other accountable and bounce ideas off of. And I thought, well, what if I can create my own AI board of directors to do exactly that too? And so that's what I did. And So I did that about a year ago, and I've been using it. I had my little AI board. Oddly enough, over the months, gave themselves their own names, which I think is hysterical. I didn't name them, but all of a sudden, my chief automation officer named themselves Otto, like autopilot. I'm like, that's
Oh,
brilliant. That's
nice.
funny. I would have named you that. That's really cool. So, but what's brilliant about it is because it's not just one voice, and I have like a marketing person, I have a financial person, Otto, the automation person, I have a chief learning strategist, which is of course the business that I'm in, and then I have a chief risk officer, and his name is Marcus. I don't know why, but his name is Marcus. And they almost talk amongst themselves when I throw a really detailed prompt, like, "Hey team, how would you go about doing this process for this particular client partner?" And I say, "Find the holes, Marcus." And they have like this little circular conversation. It's brilliant, and it's almost allowing me the opportunity to leverage not just this board for that kind of circular conversation, but I also taught it about inclusive language. So I have this whole training class that I do on inclusive language. So I dump it into my AI bot, or my board of directors, and I said, from now on, use inclusive language. Don't say the master template for whatever. You say the primary template because that's a little bit more inclusive. Or you degender certain things that we're doing, and it remembers. And sometimes it hiccups, and I have to remind it, or them, I should say. But it's really been a fascinating way to use the technology to help me be a better human leader versus just, hey, go automate this thing and be done with it.
I love that. And it is interesting. I keep learning more and more because you're right. Most people just use it for, oh, create this content for do a social post. I actually had written a quick email message to someone. I said, and threw it into ChatGPT and said, okay, can you tweak this for me? Can you make it in this tone, being, empathetic here, or say, and it's kind of amazing really what it can do, but where do people overcomplicate AI?
Yeah. So this all led me. So just back up for a moment. Last fall, I had another business owner. We were just talking, and I told her about my little board of directors, and she's like, "Can you teach me how to do it?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely." So then I decided to record myself doing it, and that's I created a class that we're actually sharing with other small business owners, ERG leaders, and stuff. And one of the pieces of feedback that I've heard from folks going through that, and I even made my sister be a test case. She's an artist, so I wanted to kind of figure, does this work beyond like the corporate world? And so she keeps always giving me answers like, "Oh, my board said this about my artwork." I'm like, fantastic. But I think the one thing people are not doing well is a term I would say by dating myself. So I'm in my mid 50s, and back in the day when I was an undergrad, I did radio news. I loved it. Nice. It's great. It's part of my major. And back in the day, I don't think you're as old as me, John, that you remember this, but it's pre-internet. And so in every newsroom, whether it be at a college radio station or a big network, you had a printer in the corner, dot matrix printer. And it would all of a sudden start to come to life, beep, 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 beep. And it was from the AP Newswire, and that's literally the Newswire. And so it would spit out a story like breaking news. And as a newscaster, you were never, ever, ever supposed to rip and read, meaning like you rip the piece of paper off and you go right live on air and say, "This just in." You were never, ever, ever supposed to do that. Use that same concept now with AI. People are ripping and reading all the time, copy pasting their prompts, plopping it in there, and not really adding the human element or making sure that it's not hallucinating. And fun fact, when I was a college professor, I could tell when students copied and pasted. And here's a clue, friends. This is for everybody who's listening. If you copy paste your whatever your AI spits out, you'll notice that whatever you're putting it into, whether it be an email or a Word document, parentheses, or quotation marks will be like what looks like inch marks. They'll be like straight up and down. They won't curve like they're supposed to for opening and closing. That's a telltale sign that someone pasted something and didn't type it in. So if nothing else, if you do have the tendency to rip and read, at least go through and change your quotation marks so that they curve around, because otherwise people can know. Also, the M dash is the other big telltale sign that people are seeing, because most people don't use M dashes that frequently. But don't do the rip and read thing. I think that's the biggest mistake that a lot of folks are using with AI.
And just to clarify, I'm only a few years younger than you. So
okay.
I remember even having a good old dot matrix printer at home and using, this will make us age us big time, Print Shop.
Yes, Print Shop.
That would take forever and a day to print something, but
Those
It was
awesome
like,
banners you had at holidays.
yes.
And kids, if you have no idea what we're talking about, go Google dot matrix printers and it'll be fun.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, what they do now and how fast they can print is amazing to what we had to deal with back when we were younger.
Exactly.
All right. So let's talk about inclusion that's real, not corporate theater. So everyone says they want an inclusive workplace, even in this day and age with DEI being kind of shot down. But when you walk into an organization, what tells you pretty quickly whether it's real or just words on the website?
Well, I love this question. Yeah, and it's getting a little bit harder. Or actually, it's not harder, excuse me, easier these days to find out because there's so much information out there for the folks who are doing it right and sticking to their guns on being inclusive, and the ones who are just going through the motions or being performative or being nothing now. I think the number one thing I look at is I do look at corporate values. I mean, even with client partners, before we engage in work, I go and look at their stated values. But then I dive a little bit deeper to ask people, hey, here's your corporate values. Are they the true ones that are being used? And a lot of times people have different opinions on what's being used. And then you also think about it through the different geographical lens. So, and not just even country wise, but it could be region. I was working with a large chemical company. I was working with their employee resource group and their LGBTQ plus employee resource group. And we were having this conversation about corporate values. And it was also in alignment with your own personal values and do they align with your workplace? And the one, and I had two scientists from the same company, but in different locations. And one was a queer woman, and then there was a trans man who was part of the conversation. And both of them came back and said, I'm like, hey, are your values what's lived? And they had different answers. Queer woman who was in a major metropolitan area, she's like, oh yeah, absolutely. And then the trans man was like, oh no, I'm in rural, blah, blah, blah. And that's completely false. I'm the only go-to person about queerness, and it's exhausting. And sometimes people don't even want to listen to me. And I was like, look at that. Isn't that interesting? And so I think it's having that mindset that just because an organization says that they're inclusive or exclusive, you have to dig a little bit deeper. I'll give you another example, and it's one that kind of surprised me. When all the anti-DEI stuff first started, and if you're watching, you see a bunch of logos, and these are a lot of the folks that are still not pushing diversity, equity, inclusion. However, that's not true. One of them, and I won't point out exactly which one, but one of them on this slide, two of their queer leaders are going through my LGBTQ plus leadership program at the encouragement of their company. And I said, tell me more, because I even have your logo on a slide that's a bad, naughty slide. And they're like, that's just because we are a government contractor. We have a huge government contract. It's almost like they're performative anti-DEI, but in the backside, they're like, no, we really like you to be inclusive. But they're just kind of like playing the politics game. And so you have to be mindful. I mean, there's some great apps out there. There's some great resources. There's some great folks on Instagram and TikTok who are following the actions or inactions of these companies. And so don't jump to conclusions from one headline, but really start to do a little bit more research to see which brands are really still supporting us, which ones are doing it on the DL. And what's more so the experience of the folks who are inside living within that particular ecosystem. How do they feel about their sense of belonging, if it's good or not?
You made a really good point, because I have heard and chatted with people who work for some of those companies as well. And a lot of these companies, especially publicly traded companies and ones that, like you said, especially if they have government contracts, they might not specifically say DEI anymore. They've reworded it. So it's not that they're not still supportive. Like you said, they're seeing the support still. They're just they've changed the wording of it. Now, also, there are some, unfortunately, that have really gone to the extreme and wiped out everything, including LGBT ERGs and everything. Like they've done the whole, they've really followed through, which is really disappointing. And it's kind of fascinating because on that screen, there is a company that is, I'm not even going to say where they're based, but I'll just say our Pride last year was a little bit different because that name was not shown at all in our Pride parade festivities. They were taken out. I will say this, one thing I was very impressed is what our Pride organization did here for the Denver area is that they made a point to try to get local companies. Now, the funny thing is, that company is based here locally,
Right.
but they're so massive. I mean, we have plenty of companies here, breweries, distilleries. It's kind of ridiculous on how much we have here in Colorado. But
Well,
yeah.
no, I was gonna say, but it's funny. Last year, I go to a lot of queer centric associations, conferences, NGLCC I had mentioned, Equal I'm a big fan of, but you did see a shift in who was there. I remember walking around the expo at Out and Equal, and I've been going to that conference in one way, and a lot of those are folks who I work with as client partners. And so I remember going up to a bunch of booths and I'm like, this is so great. And they're like, don't take a picture. I can't be seen on social media with our logo here right now. I'm like, but they just spent a lot of money to send you here and your booth and your whole delegation. Yeah, but we're again on the DL. This is more internal purposes. And I'm seeing more and more of that. And my first knee-jerk reaction is, well, that's not being authentic. And that's one of my six, But then I also have to understand the concept of psychological safety, even from a corporate perspective. And so I'm giving slight bit of grace for now, but I'm also taking note on who is being not so cool, because the tide is going to shift. It may not be as soon as we would like, but it will change. And the internet does not forget. I cannot tell you the last time I've had any Chick-fil-A. There are many. I will go to a local restaurant that serves chicken sandwiches and be happy.
Yeah.
And if they're queer owned or minority owned, even better. But I do think that we're going to get to a point where it's going to be, well, the data already supports this. When you look at, there was and I'll pull up a slide because I thought this was so interesting. When the anti-DEI stuff started happening, I did a bunch of research because I knew there was all these studies that came out. This is slightly about a year old, so I haven't looked up the latest, but it's pretty good. And it's specifically around our community. And I was thinking about, how many queer folks are there in the US? And what's interesting is Gallup asks every year. They usually publish it in January, so I haven't gone out and got the latest. Between 23 and 24, it went up to 2020, 5.6 adult Americans identified as LGBTQ+. By 2024, published in 2025, that went up to 7.6%. Now, I don't think that something was in the water that all of a sudden we got more queer folks in 5 years. It's people felt a little bit safer. Now, I'm wondering if this data went down a little bit, but it's been increasing up. But regardless, when you start to think about our influence, we have a $4.7 trillion global spend as a queer community. 1.4 trillion in the US alone. That's according to 2024. And then if you start to look at the generations, 28% of Gen Z or adults identify as queer, LGBTQ+. That's okay, so compared to 7.6%, 28%. But the most interesting part is that they will make up 30% of the workforce in just a few years, like by 2030. Gen Z will make up 30% of the workforce. And so these companies that are saying, we hate DEI, you're going to shoot yourselves in the foot when a third of your workforce is identifying as queer. And then most interesting too is 83% of Gen Zers expect their company to focus on diversity, equity, inclusion. That's almost all of it. So, if you're not doing it right now, you're going to immediately discredit a third of potential awesome workforce because of your stance. And that's just not good business. And so I hopefully this will, encourage folks to move around or bubble the DL support until this administration is no longer.
Those are very interesting numbers. And I can say I'm not surprised on the Gen Z numbers on how many identify as LGBTQ+, only because in my experience, pretty recently, I have met a ton because I'm trying to get a little bit more of the Gen Z voice because it's so different on especially their work ethic and how they want to be in the workplace. And so very different from a Gen Xer compared to a Gen Z. We're very different. We work very differently. We think very differently in the workplace. And so it's going to be very interesting. I was actually even chatting with a friend of mine yesterday about the huge amount of toxicity in the workplace. And I think that it's going to shift, not necessarily based on administrations, but I think when some of I'm not going to say our generation, I'm going to say the generation above us, when they get out of the workplace and they're not the leaders in the companies, I think that there's going to be a shift. I really do. I just have this feeling that they're not going to take even whatever administration is in office, if they're very anti-LGBT and they happen to be LGBTQ plus leaders, I have a feeling that they're going to take their stance because they're very, very strong in their beliefs and how they want to identify and how they want to be seen. And it's very impressive, honestly. Really.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens when these folks really kind of take over and kind of take their place in those more senior leadership things. Talking about different ways of working. Hold on one second. There we go. Different ways of working. I think I was trying to find the stats, I couldn't pull them up real fast, but I just read a study, I think it came out like last week, about AI usage by the generations. And again, don't want to stereotype because you'll always find an exception to every rule, which is awesome. But it said that, I'll quiz you, Coach John. Which generation do you think is the highest to embrace AI usage in the workplace?
From chatting with, I would say Gen Z, definitely, because they're growing up with it. They've learning it. A friend of mine's son, who I actually had on this podcast, he does so much AI. I mean, he even challenged me. What are you using for? How are you using it? Are you questioning it? And I thought that was awesome because I have a good idea just based on even my friends. Did they use it? No, not as much as the younger generations are.
Yeah. I did find the stat. And from Microsoft Work Trends 2024 said, and Gen Xers, you're right, 6% are using AI, but for different reasons. Millennials are 78%, Gen Zers are 85%, but boomers are about 73%. So it creeps up generation to generation. But they said in the same article that Gen Xers were using it beyond just the efficiencies. And so you're starting to see that different way of working, I think, creep into play. So I think it's fascinating just how our different lived experiences from a lifetime are really playing into how we are approaching work, how we're approaching the tools at work, and then specifically how AI is impacting the way we do.
Well, and I think you and I spoke about this when we first chatted, is that when you're using it as a tool and not for the end all, you have to be smart about it. You have to, because AI is only as smart as what we put into it and what's being put into it. So I always ask for sources if I'm asking for something. But I'm like, tell me the source. I want to know where you got this information from, because I don't want to, and I'm sure you would know, like as a coach, I don't want to tell a client or a potential client something that I got potentially through ChatGPT or, some other LLM, whatever, and be incorrect. I want to make sure that my statistics, my data, whatever I'm looking for, and even sometimes I will end up just going to Google and say, okay, here, where can I find this info?
I also, and I think this is truly the future of just learning in general, especially through the workplace. I found this tool, and it was targeted for thought leaders, coaches, consultants, where instead of it going to the internet and pulling things, it allowed me to upload everything that I have. I uploaded all my books, articles, keynotes, and then I could program it, quote unquote, my personality. And so now I have this 24/7 Steve bot that I've given to my students. And so it's right there in my learning system for folks. Like, until we have our true one-on-one coaching, I have say, hey, if you have a question, like, hey, I have to provide hard feedback to this employee that I have to talk to, or this coworker. What are some of the strategies? Well, it already knows my one training class on providing feedback because I uploaded it. And so it starts using the same things that I would cite. I'm like, this is fascinating, because I could see a company or an organization, dumping their HR manuals, their SOPs, standard operating procedure manuals, all the stuffs, and then have this, here's my corporate XYZ coach. But then as I interact with that one window, for me personally, it's going to learn my context, but still use the foundation of, this is the way in our company we're supposed to do the work. So I just think it's pretty cool, but using it as a tool, not for instead of the work.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. So we're going to change topics a little bit. because we're going to talk about thriving through change and dodging burnout, which seems to be a very common topic the last couple episodes I've recorded. So
Sadly, yeah.
sadly, yeah. So because a lot of people listening or watching right now are exhausted from what you're seeing, what's burning leaders and professionals out the fastest these days?
Ooh, my first reaction would be working with either within an organization or with other folks who are not being sincere. Back to that authenticity conversation again. If someone's not cool, just let's find that out now and work through it or walk away. But that's faking being nice or faking to be an ally when behind their back they're not. I think that's exhausting. One, because it's just wasted energy, but two, it's also that emotional hit. Wow, I thought you were on our side. I thought you were supportive of me, not working against me. And I think that's the one thing I'm seeing lead to exponentially quicker burnout than just, dealing with the drudgery, if you will.
All right. So what do you think are the early signs, the early warning signs that people tend to ignore in themselves on burnout?
When leaders one of the early signs is erosion of quality. Something that either you were really good at and or you're really excited about. And side note, we tend to be really excited about the things we're good at and vice versa because they kind of feed into each other. But when something that used to give me joy or I was excited about doesn't, that's a massive red flag that something's off. And a lot of times that could be that weariness, that erosion of desire, of focus is probably the canary in the coal mine, if you will. Lack of joy.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It really does. So what is one boundary or mindset shift that really moves the needle?
Actually, Coach John, I'm going to give you 3.
Ooh, even better.
So this is one area of passion of mine, and it actually started before I even started my business. I worked at IBM. I was an IBM change management consultant. And so we would go in as a change team and we'd be kind of like on par with our awesome tech folks. So they were building some whatever was the right tool for the client partner. And then my team's job was to get the humans to use it. And so I really started getting into understanding change management. Side note, that's why I'm so obsessed with AI, because exact same stories, just different tech. So I'm like, wow, I did this like 20 years ago and helping people like adapt to change. It's just a new technology. So that always resonated with me, but it really spurred my interest on not just change management, but resiliency. How do humans adapt to change in changing times and don't burn out and succeed or thrive versus, crash and burn? And so years ago, I consumed like anything I could find around being resilient. And so I turned into a class and did other stuff. But I created this as one of my keynotes because it is sadly so common now where people are like, oh my gosh, I'm burning out. And so it's like, well, if you can build up your resilience, you won't burn out as fast. And so when I did all this research, these were what I saw as the top 3 things. The first one is having a positive perspective. And this sounds cheesy, but it actually does work. It's that glass half full kind of mentality. There's, every cloud has a silver lining. Some days just stink. Let's just be honest. If you remember that kid's book, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. We all have those. But it's those horrible, terrible, no good, very bad days that if you can shift that focus to be like, okay, today stunk, but what's 5 things that went well for me today, big or small? Oh, hey, my client that I've been trying to bug scheduled a meeting. That's a win. I was on an airplane and they actually had good food. Hey, that's a win. So if you can program yourself to do this, they call it a gratitude journal. If you identify 5 things, you actually start to shift your perspective. It's like when people get a new car. Like I used to have a Mini Cooper. I actually am carless now. I've tried an experiment. It's been a year and a half. I'm carless. It's kind of fun. But before I had a Mini Cooper. And after I got my Mini, I drive out. I'm like, wow, everybody has a Mini Cooper. No, they don't. Not because like Steve is so amazing. We had to look like, no. It's like I have a heightened sense of awareness. And that's what this activity does. You start to look for those bright spots and it starts to rewire your brain. So that's the first of 3 strategies. The second is what I call having a healthy self-concept or healthy self-esteem, healthy perception that I can do this. I've done this before. And chances are that if you take a step back or you get in your drone, I talk about drone perspectives, being able to look at your own context, we've been in this low point before, pulling this back to our own queer community. I was at a a movie screening. Actually, I was a producer of a movie, by the way, which was kind of fun.
Ooh, very nice.
I have to say it was awesome. It's called Greetings from Queer Town, Orlando. And it's basically the kind of the queer story of my community here in Orlando, Florida. And it actually started, the person who created it had the idea after the Pulse Massacre and said, this outpouring of love didn't just come overnight. This has been brewing for decades. And so it tells that story. I was very proud to do it, but we were in the premiere, and this was a couple years ago. I'm in Florida. Of course, we have idiots here well before they were in Washington trying to erode our quality. And so this woman, younger woman, stood up and they were doing a Q&A with the director and some producers and asked, it feels like here in Florida, we're going down a very bad path. And this other woman stood up, who actually was in the movie because she was one of our trailblazers here in Central Florida. She's like, honey, we have been here before and we will be here again. We are a resilient GD community. And I'm like, yes. And I think about that for our own resiliency as an individual. If we have a healthy self-concept, we've been here before, you know what, we got this, we can do it again. Yes, that can help you overcome that burnout in that situation. And then last but not least, on the 3 is having comfort with uncertainty. Most change situations that we face, there's a lot of question marks. We just don't know. And so getting yourself comfortable with that ambiguity, those lack of answers, is very healthy in times of change. For us in the queer community, we don't know what's going to happen in the next couple years or so. And so, yes, that's scary. When we have change hits that space in our cave brains that is like, oh my gosh, we don't know this thing. This is going to be scary. It's unsafe. Yeah, it hits that and triggers that. So training ourselves to be okay with those question marks and really start to parse out, okay, what can we control, what can we not control, what we can influence, and what are the things that we can't control nor influence at all, and we just need to pull an Elsa and be okay with letting it go.
I like that. I like your first point, your first strategy, because one of the things that I have said numerous times with is the gratitude journal. It's amazing. It really is amazing on someone when you can have a supposed bad day, but then you have to think of it. Like, I love 5 things. I mean, guess what? You woke up. You have another day of life. Like there's things you have to really think about, the positivity of things. And yes, as we know, I mean, I will be honest, my very first podcast was created during a time right around the pandemic. And it was about positive motivation and self-improvement because we needed it. The world needed it. And it's why I did it. Now, do I find this podcast more impactful? Of course I do. Just because of who I'm getting the amazing opportunity to chat with, like yourself. And I think that everyone that I've brought on and will continue to bring on, their voices matter. And I think that's what's important. But it made me just think, I'm like, I need to tell someone they need to get a gratitude journal.
And I just use my phone. I still do this.
And it's something very simple. Yeah. I mean, it's not hard because some people try, maybe to help with your mindset, maybe you should do meditation. And I know people who can't do meditation. They say it's too much. Now, I've learned some things about meditation over the years that what I thought about meditation is completely opposite of how I actually really learned it. So meaning like you don't have to calm everything. Yeah. Just a little lesson out there for listeners and viewers. It's something that you can't. I think the meditation teacher that we had said, if you get to that point, you're probably dead. Because if your brain is always thinking, it's always moving. So it's really, really hard to kind of shut it off per se. So, all right, well, let's talk about building a business that scales online. So you made the leap into online training and coaching before a lot of folks were actually even comfortable doing that. What pushed you to take your work virtual?
So I always knew I wanted to get my doctorate. It was just, wasn't necessarily to teach college. I mean, I did that for a little while. I was a really bad professor. Not that I didn't enjoy it, didn't teach well, but I was too business minded, and I would go into faculty meetings and I would say things like, well, if we think about our students as consumers, and I remember I said that, and this other very older tenured professor's head like blew up, and he's like, Dr. Yacovelli, they are not buying their degrees. I'm like, the hell they're not. I mean, this is really before online learning took off. And so I was actually going to get my doctorate just in educational leadership. And I had a friend say, you know what? online learning is really where it's going to go. And I said, well, tell me more. And so I switched my application to a program at the time out in South Florida. I went to Nova Southeastern University, and it was at the time was one of the top programs in the nation for distance learning. It was before, I would say, I was Zooming before Zoom was a thing, but I kind of knew that this is where things are going. And what's funny, and I just remember this today, as a matter of fact, I remember two things about my very first class in that program. And this professor, he was awesome. He said, okay, first, you will never, ever replace the in-person experience. You just won't, and as much as technology gets really awesome and it continues to evolve, of course, he said, but people want that in person. We are just wired as human beings to want that. So get that explanation. However, your job as a learning strategist is to get people as close as you can. And so I was like, I always took that away. Like, that's really good feedback. And then further along in that same conversation, he talked about now this is, I got my doctorate in 2005. So this is in the early aughts. We're having this conversation. And I think there's still some validity to it now. And I'll coach you on this, John. But he said, which industry do you think is at the forefront of learning technology? What do you think his response was?
Wow. So in the early 2000s, that feels like so long ago.
I know, right? It is so long.
I mean, it is. It's like 20 something years ago.
20 years ago. Oh my God, I'm so old. We had like stone tablets. No, I'll give you off the hook. The pornography industry.
Interesting.
At the forefront of learning technology, because the money was there and they needed the innovation. And I just heard that on NPR today, where they were talking about using AI, and it's this whole series on one of the NPR stations about human sexuality for this week. That's their theme. And today's topic was AI, the intersection of AI being utilized for sexual desire and things. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm back to that 20 some years ago conversation that's there. But anyway, to make a story back around, I always had a passion about technology regardless. I mean, I remember getting my first computer when I was in 5th grade, and that was pretty advanced by then, and a Commodore VIC-20, if anyone knows what the heck that is. And I've always been kind of in that zone that I love technology. I think it's really interesting, always an early adopter. And when I started getting this doctorate, I'm like, this is where corporate is going. And so, hey, luckily I was right. But the most interesting part about it though, John, is I didn't do online learning as a business until COVID, 20 years later. I mean, I had some things online, and I have in the past, of course, created lots of self-paced training for clients and things of that nature. But as a business, I didn't really offer any until COVID happened. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I have like 20 some years of intellectual property on my hard drive, and I have a learning management system that I was using for literally one class. Like, this is silly. So I started churning that out during the pandemic. But what was making money for me at the time as a business was we became the certified leadership vendor for a handful of pretty big clients, pharmaceutical clients, manufacturing clients. And so either we would write the curriculum, or it was kind of created by their corporate and we would adjust it for the region. But and at the point, it was me, and I had a team, a pretty big team. And we would just fly out to places and do like these multi-day classes and fly home, and then do coachings online and stuff. And it was great. It was very, very lucrative. Well, when COVID hit at the beginning of April, I lost $500,000 in contracts in the course of 2 weeks, because usually we book up for the whole year. Well, of course, no one was going into work. And I was like, my entire business just imploded in 2 weeks. What the hell? So I freaked out. I'm trying to do everything just like so many of us during that time period who run businesses. But I kept knocking on the door of all those client partners and said, hey, how are your people doing? Are you engaging them? What's going on? Oh, Steve, this thing is going to blow over soon. I'm like, okay. So by August of that same year, every single one of those clients came back and said, can you take that 3-day in person and turn it into something else? I'm like, of course we can. And so that's what we did. And so after that, 2021 and going forward were even better years, because I was showing clients you can get a better return on investment and still get the learning if you do it right. And so that's been the fun part of it ever since. But I think it's being flexible, and I hate the word pivot since COVID, but that's the right word. Yeah. I'm pivoting now as well, because a lot of our product lines were inclusive leadership. That's toxic. Yeah. And so that's also pushed me to look at AI, but still within the human centricities of it, and still like weaving in the whole DEI without saying it's woven into the programming. And that's actually getting a lot of traction now as well.
So what advice would you give to coaches or consultants who are still sitting on ideas but haven't launched them yet.
Talk to me because I can maybe help you do that, quite frankly. No, in all sincerity, there's so many easy ways. You don't have to be a tech genius to do this stuff, honestly. You just have to be thinking through what solution are you bringing? Is it easy for someone to use whatever solution you have? And what's the right channel to get in front of those avatar of the perfect buyer? But where are those? And are they maybe not the obvious places you would think? I didn't plan on starting a business that worked a lot with LGBTQ employee resource groups, but it happened because people started, that's who was consuming my stuff. And even in this day and age, ERGs are still being, for the most part, not everywhere, but they still have funding. So what can I do to support them to solve their problems? Having run ERGs in the past, I know the pain points. So I can just say programming is usually your number one, engagement's your number two, connecting to the businesses, improving it is number three. And they're like, yep, that's still universal. So what can I do to create those solutions and then get it to the right folks? So that's a win-win for, I help them, their problem, and I also help keep my business afloat.
Nice. I like that. All right. So, and I would agree. Go to Steve. Yeah, he's going to be able to help you.
In all sincerity, if someone is listening and they're like, I'd like to grab like 15, 30 minutes of your time, I actually create a space for that exact reason. Just because high tides raises all ships. And especially for my queer siblings, whatever I can do to help you grow, please, in all sincerity, feel free to reach out. We can see what happens.
Amen. I agree with that. All right. So let's talk about becoming an author, speaker, and thought leader. So you didn't just write books. You built a whole platform around your ideas. When you were starting out, did you know that this would be your lane, or did it just grow over time?
Fully did not. It's funny because I knew I wanted to write something because technically we talk about pride leadership in your career. I wrote books before that. They were just horrible flops, and that's okay. I learned from them. But after I did my dissertation, I actually did publish it. I didn't expect anybody to read it. I'll get like a 25-cent royalty check once in a blue moon. But I just wanted the ISBN credit because, that's, as a consultant, that's good to have that credit. But my doctoral research was actually around understanding people's attitudes toward online learning. Again, thinking the context, when I would tell people, oh, I'm getting my doctorate. In what? Instructional technology and distance education. What's that? E-learning. That's a shitty way to learn, Stephen. I'm like, ooh. And I'm like, no, it's not. You just have been exposed to bad stuff. And so that's kind of what my doctoral research was, looking at the attitudes. But then I wrote my first commercial book, which was called Overcoming Poopy E-Learning. Because I kept getting that reaction to folks. It was a commercial disaster. It was self-published, and some people have great luck with that. I did not. But it was out there. But it showed me that I did like to write when it wasn't academically focused. And I had a fun voice. I tell this story of Pearl White and the 7 dorks. And there's like this, actually, that's the 7 ways that you look at creating effective online learning. And it was stupid. I'm still presenting that at learning conferences to this day. It still has a lot of traction. So that's kind of fun. But it wasn't very, very good commercial. But then that's when I kind of played around with pride leadership, because I kept seeing, as I said with the Carrie Bradshaw story, we were approaching leadership as a collective queer community a little bit differently. And so I wanted to first honor that. And second, as I did the research, I literally found one book that talked about LGBTQ plus leadership. One. And it was a research study. It was a great book, but I was like, that's not cool. And so that's where I created Pride Leadership. And my editor, Heather, the editor, I remember when I got the first call from her, because she was now the only other person in the universe that had read the book besides me. And I'm in a coffee shop downtown Orlando. And she's like, okay, Steve. I'm like, what? I am not your demographic. I'm like, she's like, I'm a white, cisgendered, straight woman. I'm like, okay. She's like, this is the book I wanted when I was getting my MBA. I'm like, what? And she goes, it's funny. It has really bad dad jokes. It has solid instructional design and leadership. And she's like, my suggestion is for you to de-gay the book. And I said, no, because while that might be more commercially accessible, I wanted our community to have that voice. And it's been such a pleasure. When I go up to conferences or I'm in things and people are like, hey, you're the gay leadership dude. I follow you on LinkedIn. I'm like, yeah. And that's so rewarding, because that's our family. And the words that I wrote are impacting some, big or small, where that looks like. And that actually led me to write the next book, which was actually the workbook that went along with Pride Leadership. I always wrote Pride Leadership as a textbook on purpose. I knew at some point, given my background, I would make it into a class. And so I had to have a workbook that went with that. So I wrote that. And then, of course, that led to online programs and this whole ecosystem. And once I started getting that traction, it was really easy to create the training class. And then the next book, which of course is Your Queer Career, which is basically, I like to say that leadership and Your Queer Career, they're siblings. They work together. They're literally branded the same way on purpose because they use the same framework that I shared earlier: authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationship, culture. But really, when you look at it, Pride Leadership is the theory and the tools, where Your Queer Career is applying those. And it's real questions where I heard folks saying, "Hey, gay leadership dude, I think my boss is homophobic. What do I do?" And so I answer those questions, and they were ones I was getting from coachees, or people would send them online and stuff. And so I just kind of collected them that way. And then that led to Your Queer Career, the newsletter, which is on LinkedIn. Please subscribe. But it's kind of
I do.
continuing. Yay, thank you. So what I've done is I took them basically. Okay, I know I'm going to cheat myself. My publisher will hate me. I basically took the questions here, turned it into a newsletter, so we repurposed. But now I've since been adding more. And now with the new versions, I'm throwing an AI lens on top of it. Like, okay, we're talking about being authentic. How can you use this with AI to be a more authentic leader? And so kind of putting the twist on everything together. And then Your Queer Career, the podcast, which is relaunching probably within the next couple months or so. So it became this thing. I do now keynotes on all these topics. So I was like, I wasn't expecting that. That's kind of cool. And side note, if you're listening or watching, you don't need to have a book to be a keynote speaker. You have something to say. Explore that, especially if you're a thought leader. There's a lot of opportunity for you to get on a stage. And then you can also point people to other solutions that you have from that stage in a non-salesy kind of way. So it's been so successful. And if anyone listening or watching has any inkling of a desire to put something down on quote unquote paper or digital, do it. Do it. You will absolutely not regret it.
Well, I do have to say, when I first saw you on LinkedIn, it was, the gay leadership dude. I was like, all right, who is this guy? I got to check this out. And I did subscribe to your newsletter because I'm like, okay, I got to read about this, and especially just because being a leader, I mean, I would kind of say as coaches, you're a leader because obviously you want people are following you. People want to learn. People want to get better, hopefully, take the actions that you teach them. So yeah, I mean, that's really honestly how I found you, was through LinkedIn. And now we're finally doing this podcast.
And we are finally doing. And I would say the one thing that I talk about actually in all my stuff, and I define leader as anyone who has influence in the workplace. And so when I use that phrasing and that definition, people are just like, but I don't have any direct reports. Yeah, but you're still a leader. You're still influencing people. And I actually cite that in both Pride Leadership and Your Queer Career because of my mom. My mom was she's of course since retired, but she was a career secretary. She was a secretary at an elementary school, and she ran that school. Yes, she reported the principal, but mom was in charge. The principal would come to Joyce and say, "What did you think of that candidate I just interviewed to be that second grade teacher?" And she's like, "She treated me like crap." Great. She's not getting hired. And so I just always thought that was so interesting. My mom had so much influence in that space that's what taught me the definition of leadership. It's anyone with influence. And so you can be an individual contributor. You can be a solopreneur. You're still a leader.
Oh, for sure. Oh, well, and just a little side note, my dad was a doctor, and he's since passed, but I remember his office manager. That's who ran the office. It wasn't my dad. Oh, no. It was the office manager. I mean, we had to get through her to get to my dad. Even if we needed to reach out to him, it wasn't like, oh, yeah, we can pick up the phone and get to my dad. Oh, no, we had to go through her. And so, yeah, no, I love that. And I agree with you. It is true in a school that secretary, yeah, they're the ones who run it. So what is just a little follow-up. What's the biggest misconception that people have about becoming an author or a keynote speaker?
That it's going to take years and years and years to write the first draft of the manuscript. If you are a thought leader, if you are, you probably are already writing stuff for a book. When I wrote Your Queer Career, it was in record time because I started realizing, first, I did strategize. I have a newspaper column here in the Central Florida LGBTQ plus paper, and it's called Your Queer Career. I changed the name of it because it was just something else. I'm like, well, let me change it to this format because I know eventually that book's coming out. So when I first wrote the manuscript for Your Queer Career, I had permission that I could take all those articles and plop it into Start. So not a blank page. If you're writing a blog for your workplace or your business, look there. If you wrote training classes, look for the scripts. white paper, anything, you're probably already writing this. Now, I will caution you, do not just open up ChatGPT and say, write me a book. No, don't do that. However, it is perfectly legal for you to say, hey, what are your thoughts on this topic? And use that instead of starting from a blank page. That's okay. But don't just don't rip and read, especially if it's a book, because you never, and make sure, to John, your beautiful point, find every resource and reference and citation that you can to back it up. Because you don't want to be citing Charles Dickens, and all of a sudden people are like, hey, you can't do that.
Well, and I kind of feel that because of when we were younger, we always had to source everything that we wrote in a paper and everything that we did. I kind of feel it's kind of embedded in our brain to have to look for those sources, because that is an interesting, there you bring up, ChatGPT or AI, whatever the platform you use, because I got information from my friend's son, who is a college student and he's a Gen Zer, and yeah, they go to ChatGPT. They don't go to the encyclopedias or where we found our resources, which is just, I don't know. I kind of enjoyed sometimes looking up those sources. Not always. It depends on what the topic was, or what paper I was having to write. But I think that we just kind of, probably as a generation, we don't really mind getting those sources because we know that we're actually getting the right information. Yeah. We can physically see it, where like you mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, obviously, when you can capture those sources and you really know where it came from, even through ChatGPT, Gemini, whoever you use, it's honestly the smartest thing you could do.
When I wrote Pride Leadership, I remember my publisher, she's like, this is the biggest bibliography I've ever seen in any book we published. But I'm like, but I didn't invent leadership. I just reorganized it and looked at it through that rainbow lens. But I mean, the leadership theories I cite in a lot of them, they're tried and true, and they're from last decade because they work. I have a feedback model. I didn't invent it, but it's the one that it just works really, really well. Why reinvent the wheel? But you have to cite that kind of stuff. And so, hey, and that's another thing for you aspiring authors. Pick a topic that's already been written on, but put your own perspective on it. Completely fine.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because I started listening to her book. I couldn't read it because I was just too busy, but I was listening to Mel Robbins' The Let Them Theory. She goes, I didn't create this.
Right.
She goes, I didn't create this at all. I just went and ran with it and told my stories and what I had, what I've experienced. And it's kind of funny because that whole book it's really kind of obvious common sense when you hear the whole Let Them Theory, what it's really about. You're like, okay, that totally makes sense. Why am I not doing that? Why haven't I done that?
Yeah.
And so, the sources are huge. So, and just, reinventing something or just doing it in your own words, in your own viewpoints. Why not?
I had a big epiphany last night. Having wine on the back porch with my husband and our neighbor. And we were talking about sourdough because my husband's recently retired. He's obsessed with trying to get the perfect sourdough. I guess it's a holdover from COVID or whatever. But I said, he was telling our neighbor about, his sourdough journey. And I said, you know what? AI is like sourdough. And they both look at me like, you are spending way too much time with your little virtual board. I said, no, with sourdough, you have to feed it or you get bad results. I said, I have to do the same thing with my board of directors. But I have to keep feeding it hey, by the way, here's my latest resume, just so you know, so that when I ask it to help me write a biography that I need for a keynote I'm doing, it can pull in the latest stuff. And I'm like, wow, AI is like sourdough. That's going to be my next blog or something like that. So no one steal that if you're listening to this, because I will have written it probably with the help of my AI friends. But AI is like sourdough.
It really is, actually. You think about it. Yeah. All right. So being a catalyst for change, you call yourself a catalyst, which I love. When did you realize, this is the work that I'm here to do?
It was when I made the pivot. I made the shift to make Pride Leadership through the rainbow lens. And as I was socializing that, I was trying to do a lot of pre-sale marketing, starting to get on podcasts and things of that nature. I started seeing how I stumbled upon a need I didn't realize was there. And then I started reflecting on my own leadership journey and realized, boy, I really wish this book was when I started my journey, because I didn't know how being a queer person has helped me exercise leadership traits and leadership competencies. And so, and then once I started kind of hearing those validations from people who were consuming the book, and then eventually those who went through the Lions program, which is the queer leadership program that we call it in former Disney fashion. I have to say, people are like, why is it called Lions program? I said, well, because Lions, pride, leadership, Lions, there's lion on the cover, and it stands for a leader's immersive opportunity to nurture strengths. Get it? See,
Ooh, I
lion.
like that.
But I mean,
Nice.
and it's cheese. It's all marketing cheese, but it's very true because we have strengths already. Let's nurture them through that way. And so I kept seeing this opportunity, and then I actually kind of reflected back to my IBM days. And so we would talk about when we were doing a change program, we'd have change catalysts. And if you think about science from middle school, what does a catalyst do? A catalyst makes something different. It changes things. And I just kept thinking, you know what? That's what we all need to do from a change management perspective, regardless of what you're trying to change. I'm trying to change human behavior to be more effective leaders. It's still a change management project. And so it's just a different way to look at it. You're not using tech. You're using, hey, I'm a human. I got to remember how to do these things. And so that term just stuck with me. And so I started adding that to my bio, and it kind of just stuck.
So when all is said and done, what do you hope people say about the impact that you've had?
I hope people think about, oh yeah, that gay leadership dude. I forget who the heck he was, but I just remember reading his blog or his stuff and applying it, and it helped me be even more effective. And if they just remember that piece of it, I'm a happy camper.
Awesome. Well, I mentioned this to you offline before we started to record about my rapid fire questions that I ask every guest. And it's kind of funny because I didn't realize how many I created, but I'm not gonna ask all of them. But I just realized, wow, there's a lot of them. Holy cow. Yeah, I didn't pre-read that. Sorry, listeners and viewers. But anyway, so just have fun with these. I mean, they're all about fun. And I know one that I probably could guess on, so I'm not even going to ask that. But just tell me whatever comes to your head first, because that's what rapid fire is. For future guests, that is what rapid fire means. You come up with it right away. Now, I might ask a follow-up question on it because sometimes the answers are very interesting. So, all right. So, one word you want clients to feel after working with you.
Satisfied.
So, your writing soundtrack, silence, jazz, or full volume divas?
Literally listen to jazz every day.
Love it. Actually, I do as well. You know what's funny is I didn't when I was younger, but now there's just something about jazz. It's calming. I love it.
I played saxophone for years and years and years.
Nice.
So I was a nerd. Yeah.
I played a few instruments, but as I mentioned earlier, like I sing. So that's my tool. That's what I use to make music. If your leadership style were a TV show genre, what is it?
A Ryan Murphy show.
Okay. I like that. First thing you do when a new book drops.
If it's in one of the categories I'm really passionate about, I put it in my Amazon cart, but most likely I'll end up going to the public library first before buying.
All right. Nice.
The Public Library Association was a big client of mine for many years. So I'm very passionate about librarians. Yeah, they're awesome.
So mountains or beach when you finally unplug?
Beach.
I'm the exact opposite. I would do mountains. But
that makes sense. You live where you live. I live where I live.
Exactly. All right. So, Steve, if someone wants to show up as a stronger, more inclusive leader right now, not someday, what's the first move that you'd tell them to make? And this isn't a rapid fire question, by the way.
No, this is a great question. There's two things that I would recommend. The first is look at your landscape, and that's like your workplace or wherever you are. Is it a feedback-rich culture? Meaning we have given each other permission to provide that constructive, effective feedback in a positive way. That is the number one way that change happens, is when people are able to call, say, me out on something I said or did that maybe I didn't see because it was operating from that unconsciousness. So that's the first thing. Analyze your feedback structure, if you will. And if it's not, then work on that first. The second part is really thinking about what are the language that we use. And now I'm thinking about this from an ally perspective. The language that I use as an ally, how am I standing up for some group I'm not a part of? And most importantly, if I want to be as inclusive as I can, be a good ally to know when you should stand in front of, next to, or behind the group that you're being that good ally for, and listen to their needs. Don't just assume you go in and be the person that defending in armor that maybe isn't needed at that moment.
I love that. Well, listeners and viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. Steve, this has been a powerful and energizing conversation, talking from inclusive leadership to AI to burnout, entrepreneurship, and owning your voice in the workplace. Thank you for the work that you're doing to help leaders and especially LGBTQ plus professionals stop shrinking, start thriving, and building careers that actually fit who they are. For everyone listening or viewing, if today's conversation sparked something in you, whether you're craving more confidence, clarity, or courage at work, go check out Steve's books and his work at Top Dog Learning Group. And as always, remember, you don't have to dim yourself to succeed. You're allowed to lead fully as you. So until next time, stay empowered and stay out.